Welcome to the Rural Recharge, a podcast of the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. Rural Recharge is a guided conversation that allows you to cut through the noise and multitude of information out there. You should be able to trust your sources, which is why we're a platform that comes straight from the source, the farmers and ranchers growing what we eat, wear, and use every day. Our guest joining us today is Mr. Pat Durden, owner of Durden Red Angus in Gadsden County and current president of Florida Cattlemen's Association. Pat's family has farmed and ranched in Gadsden County since before the Civil War and continues to embrace their heritage. Pat has a passion for conservation and preserving our wild Florida landscapes. His slogan during his year of Florida Cattlemen's Association president is, "Cows keep Florida green." Last year, the Florida Cattlemen's Association and Conservation Florida announced a partnership to highlight the crucial role that Florida farmers and ranchers play in protecting our working lands. We're looking forward to discussing conserving our natural resources in Florida today, and thank you for being here, Pat.
Thank you, President Smith. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. Now, just tell us, first of all, a little bit, where is Gadsden County in Quincy, Florida?
Okay, so Gadsden County, and if I don't say this, my dad would get upset. Coon Bottom is where I was raised, and that's where our home place is. Gadsden County is just west of Leon County, our capital city, so adjoining county to the capital.
Very good. And you're from Coon Bottom, so we
Yes,
got to get that corrected. What is the population of Coon Bottom, Pat?
I'm really not sure that we have identified the city limits or anything there, so it's not very many people still, luckily. Well, but it is growing like everywhere in our state.
That's true. But get us started. Just tell us a little background story of your ranching there in Gadsden County.
All right, so let's see. The current place that I call our home place, my grandfather, Lamar Durden, started, and it was a shade tobacco farm, and they had cattle as well and everything. So that's where my dad grew up, and it's just kind of, now we're just a cow-calf operation, and we have Red Angus seed stock, which is a registered herd. So that's kind of what we do on the ranch there. We don't farm. We do have some timber and stuff like that on some other properties and there at the home place. But basically just a small cow-calf operation in the panhandle of Florida.
Well, how about that? Now, explain to us how you became involved in the Florida Cattlemen's Association and what FCA, for those who might not know, what is it?
All right, so how I became involved is kind of I guess it's a short and a long story. So my dad was our county extension director in Gadsden County for I don't know how many years. He worked for extension for over 35 years. Mm-hmm. In Leon County, he started out of school, and then he went to Wakulla County, and then he finally made it back home to Gadsden County. So, and he and a Mr. Billy Poston were the guys that started our county cattlemen's association years and years ago. I think Leroy Baldwin was the president of FCA when they started it. Mr. Billy and him were friends. So I've kind of just grown up in that, going to meetings with my dad and stuff. And then probably, I'm going to say maybe 15, 20 years ago, I started legitimately paying attention and going, because I had my own investment in cows and everything, and I did a lot of that on lease property. But I just came engaged at the county level, and then eventually moved on to the state level, and it's been very rewarding to be a part of our organization. Our organization is a statewide nonprofit organization devoted entirely and exclusively to promoting the cattle industry. We generally are private property rights oriented, but we provide education not only to our producers, but to our fellow Floridians on the cattle industry. And obviously we do a fair amount of lobbying in Tallahassee on behalf of our industry.
Absolutely. How does someone become a member of Florida Cattlemen's Association? Do they have to own cattle?
You do not have to own cattle, and honestly, our dues are $150. You can go online and join your county association. Most counties are represented, but there are a few that have kind of joined forces and are multi-county affiliates. So, I mean, it's pretty easy. And I say it's the cheapest insurance you can buy, along with being a member of Farm Bureau, obviously. So, I mean, I think they're both very important organizations.
And that's interesting, too, because you're the president of Florida Cattlemen's Association, but you're also a member of Florida Farm Bureau.
Yes, yep. And I serve currently on the Gadsden County Board. And this year, they're probably wondering where I'm at a lot of times because I've missed most of our county board meetings. But we do have a pretty active county association, and that's been rewarding to be a part of that as well, for sure.
But one of the things that you had, especially running for the president of Florida Cattlemen Association, and something that you're very passionate about, is conservation and preservation, and that's evidenced by your tagline for your year as Florida Cattlemen's president. How did that topic become front and center on your farm and your platform?
So cows keep Florida green, and it's just, it's really, I believe, an integral part of saving the working lands of Florida. I mean, you hear the number 1,000, 1,200 people a day moving to Florida. And it's really important that our fellow Floridians and our visitors that come here understand that these lands produce the food and fiber, but they also provide the green space, the water recharge, the wildlife habitat. I mean, Florida's a sportsman's paradise. You can certainly fish year-round, but you can almost hunt year-round, basically, too. But you wouldn't have those things if it wasn't for the farms and ranches in our state, and we have to really work hard to protect those things. And that's why I just kind of, I feel like past presidents have had their taglines, and I could go through a couple of them leading up to it, but it almost just kind of made sense after going back 4 or 5 years. I was like, all those things equate to cows keep Florida green, and the main pitch is environmentally,
absolutely,
but it's also financially. I mean, we all remember COVID, and we all know Florida is a tourist-driven state. That's our number one thing usually. But when times got tough and everything, agriculture became number one again. And I believe that's why our state came out of COVID strong, and we're still a vibrant state economically. I mean, so I think everybody needs to recognize that ag is what saved our state.
That's right. Pat, I know a lot of times, especially our folks, they want to see Florida stay green, and a lot of folks move in here. Cattlemen own a lot of land in the state, and they're out of 34.3 million acres, 9.72 million of those are in agriculture, and cattlemen are a big part of that. And especially being large landowners, there's a threat to the industry by purchasing from developers to build on these properties. Is that something that the cattlemen are seeing consistently? Have you seen your members have a concern with what's increasing land prices and the threat of that going into permanent development?
Absolutely, and just like anywhere across the nation, farms and ranches are usually generational.
That's right.
So when you have the family growing, it gets a little difficult because everybody doesn't stay on the farm or the ranch. And so the conservation easements, rural and family lands, is the one that I promote the most. That goes through the Department of Agriculture. Is a program that they can sell their development rights in perpetuity. I mean, it stays in ag production in perpetuity after they make this agreement voluntarily with the state. And to me, I mean, obviously they can do whatever they want with that money, but what it does for a lot of folks, to me, is it allows them to possibly even grow and gather up some of the other land around them that might be gobbled up by developers really quickly. Or it just allows them to stay financially viable and invest that so they can continue to farm and ranch on the land that they did sell the easement on. So I mean, I think conservation easements for working lands are going to be what hopefully, slows down and certainly saves a good portion of the farms and ranches in Florida.
And I know Rural Family Lands Protection Act was very strongly backed by Florida Farm Bureau as well as the Florida Cattlemen's Association to be a tool in the toolbox for preservation and conservation of some of these very valued properties, whether it be for an economic, ecological, environmental. A lot of these properties have benefit for a wildlife corridor, carbon sequestration, water recharge. There's just numerous benefits that society has had and would like to maintain, but it's under a constant threat. And one of them you mentioned is generational growth, that some of the family would rather cash in and get out and not be involved in an industry that, to be honest, can be quite volatile and and maybe good a couple of years, but then we know the lean ones are coming too, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And I think you have to have a passion for our industry to really understand it, because, a lot of times you are, I guess you'd say land rich, but there's very little profit margin in agriculture a lot of times. And we do have to be able to make it through the lean times. And, it'd be nice if we controlled the markets that our commodities were sold through, but, we don't. And so we don't really have a lot of control over the input cost. And
That's right.
So you really have to have a passion for it. And I think, that difficulty financially, I think also leads us down a path that the public probably doesn't 100% understand it, where we rely on science and
That's
technology, right. And we continue to move our industry forward in every way we can so we can stay economically viable. And those things, oftentimes, are mutually beneficial for our fellow Floridians. A little side note there. So my dad graduated the University of Florida in 1960, and he's still got some of his old school books, and you can go back through them, and sometimes it's almost comical how far we've come with what we recommend scientifically and things like. And that's what I hope people understand, that farmers and ranchers absolutely we keep pushing the envelope farther and farther, utilizing technology, utilizing the research that our researchers do to improve our efficiency, so we use less resources to produce the same amount, or potentially even more in a lot of cases. And we've gotten exceptionally good at it.
Absolutely. Well, tell us about Conservation Florida, who they are and why they do what they do. And I know you're very participatory in that. Tell us a little bit about Conservation Florida.
All right. So Conservation Florida, I serve on an advisory committee. One of our past presidents of Florida Cattlemen's, Matt Pierce, is the chairman of their board currently. And what they do is they work with landowners who voluntarily express an interest in protecting their lands. And they look for programs. It might be Rural and Family Lands. It might be Florida Forever. It might be a federal program. They look for programs. They help the landowner navigate all these programs and red tape, and they just try and help them get to a point where they're comfortable and they can come to an agreement with one of the agencies that purchases conservation easements, and that's what they do. They also fundraise, and they will do purchasing of some properties, and then they will hold them in perpetuity as well. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what they do. But the reason I chose to partner with them was that it's just trying to get outside of our own little bubbles that we're in all the time. And sometimes, a group like Conservation Florida or Ducks Unlimited that we also partnered with, mm-hmm. and the National Wild Turkey Federation, is about getting outside of our bubble and telling our story, and hopefully having other people tell our story and help us fight the fight, which is to continue to farm and ranch in Florida and tell our fellow Floridians and the people in Tallahassee what a great job we do as stewards of the land. And so those partnerships were about that. I think they've been productive. It does make you interact with some people that I would never have really interacted with, just because they come from a different. They may be a doctor on the coast. That is, right. I mean, of course, everybody eats, but it's not like we're going to always run in the same circles. But when we can bring these groups, if we can find common ground with these groups and work together on a single issue, which this issue with Conservation Florida is about conservation easements and the wildlife corridor, and a big portion of the wildlife corridor is made up of working lands, which is farms and ranches. Right. So they understand it and they get it, and there are other conservation groups that are working in conjunction on the same issues, and we support them and everybody in that endeavor. The idea with the sportsmen's groups were, kind of mentioned it earlier, Florida's a sportsman's paradise. I think that's a big driver of why some people come here. I mean, you can recreate, and you can go fishing, you can go hunting year round in our state, and those organizations have a strong footprint here, and those members kind of get it once they start, talking about what ag lands provide for them. They start to understand, because me and you both, I think, would agree that I've never been on a great dove hunt or anything at a Walmart parking lot. It just doesn't work out very well. They, generally somebody's going to show up that doesn't like it.
What you mentioned the wildlife corridor, because that's a big part of what Conservation Florida's intent is, to actually fill in some of those gaps, to preserve some of that land for heritage, as well as the benefit that comes from it.
Yeah.
And there's a plan, and there are tools to implement that plan. There are federal and state programs, as you've already mentioned, and Conservation Florida is engaged in connecting those landowners to some of those programs with a will or intent to do that, to engage in some of that conservation, which benefits the whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have heard that some people talk about rural and family lands, which is one of the programs that I promote the most. They say, well, that's the big landowners. Actually, that's incorrect. Anything in that wildlife corridor area, or even outside of it with rural and family lands, but obviously the concentration is on the corridor for the most part, but there's no minimum number of acres. If it has a environmental value and a ag value, and it needs to be protected and preserved, then it absolutely would meet the requirements for the program. And there's many, like you mentioned, there's many different programs, and that's really, I think, the benefit of working with a land conservatory and others is it kind of helps the landowner navigate and find the program that works best for them.
Absolutely.
And I think that's very important, because you can look at, depending on how big the property is, it may be very diverse, and part of it may not even be in ag. It may just be some wetlands, and that may be done through a different program. And so there's a lot of benefits to working with people that kind of know and understand the programs. And I'll go ahead and say, I'm one of the world's worst. I'm going to rely on the experts when I'm dealing with stuff like that. I think it's just good business to rely on people that do that sort of thing every day, whether you're talking to your forester and making sure that you're making decisions with them, or any other consultant that you're working with. I think it's very beneficial to make sure that you're dealing with reputable folks that actually understand what's going on in those programs and which ones will work best for you.
Even some extension agents through University of Florida IFAS. That would be helpful too.
Oh yeah, guy. Thank you, Mr. Smith. You just saved me from my dad. Yes, absolutely. Your extension agents are always a great resource.
Well, we've talked about conservation, and that's one thing. And truly, too, one of the other things we deal with is sustainability. And they're buzzwords today, but they're vital to the agricultural industry. They're tremendously relevant in our circles, and especially in farming and ranching. Explain just a little bit what you mean and what it means to you personally, what conservation and sustainability, what those words mean.
So the sustainability buzzword, it always kind of throws me a little bit here and there, because I want to go, farmers and ranchers are the most resilient.
That's right.
Men and women on the planet, and we constantly have to improve and grow, and we wouldn't be here if we weren't sustainable. We wouldn't be multi-generational farms and ranches scattered across the nation if we weren't sustainable. So I think we've always, before it was a buzzword, worked very hard on being sustainable. And so it's kind of a word that throws me sometimes. I mean, I know we hear it and we like to use it because it's used sometimes against us in ways. But the reality and the data would show you that we continue to produce more food and fiber, utilizing less resources, less water. I mean, everything we do, we have gotten better at. And I mean, I haven't pulled up today the definition of sustainability, but I mean, I think if you continue to produce the same thing or more of it, and you utilize less resources to do it, that's pretty sustainable. And agriculture is absolutely doing that, and we've always done that. And we will continue to improve and rely on the science and the technology that's available to do it.
And certainly doing it with a lot less people. And that's a fact. There are less and less producers out there, aren't there?
Absolutely. I wish I could tell you the numbers on that. I know the dairy guys are really, fewer and fewer. Right. And but yeah, I mean, if you're going to talk about a farm or a ranch, a family-run farm or a ranch, you're generally talking about a handful of people doing everything. And like our little operation, I mean, we've got me, my 86-year-old father, and my wife, and every once in a while we'll get a little help from somebody. But that's it. I mean, we run a bare bones operation, and a lot of us operate like that. I mean, sometimes you have to, just because you can't afford to hire people. Right. But it's a great life. It's a great way to grow up. I certainly wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, we talked earlier before we started about some fun stories that have come about, working with family on the farm or ranch, and like we said then, the greatest stories are the ones where the plan didn't go as you were planning. So I mean, and I think farmers and ranchers just kind of roll with those kind of punches, and that's why we I think have a positive outlook on life in general.
Well, Pat, maybe we ought to do just an entire podcast on some of those stories we were telling earlier, because they were funny. Oh, yeah. Especially with family. And I tell you, those are memories that we'll always have. And generally it was the disastrous ones that are the most memorable, but they were disastrous at the time. But now looking back, they actually have a tremendous amount of humor. And, it's part of the heritage of who we are. And it's family oriented. And most of our farms in Florida are family operations and owned by husbands, wives, generational. You mentioned that earlier as well. And there's a reason why we want to maintain that. It is a part of our life. And that's a value to me, is the heritage, the generational benefit. And I think a lot of times folks perceive agriculture as being, corporate and being unified into big conglomerates. And that's just so far from the truth.
Absolutely. I mean, some of Florida's biggest ranches.
That's right.
You'll hear the last name of the family, but they don't know how many family members that is.
That's right.
I mean, and when you start splitting it up and breaking it down, they're all working together. I mean, some of these ranches that I think some people envision there's one guy with that last name. There's like 20.
That's right.
That's right. And granddad's still there, and the 4 or 5 sons and all the grandsons and granddaughters and daughters are out there working on the ranch, and a lot of times half of them are working in town and still working on the ranch or the farm. I mean, it's I think there is a little misconception sometimes when they see, especially on some of the big ranches, they go, "Oh, no, it's not one guy."
That's right.
I mean, not that it'd be a problem if it was, but honestly, it's every generation it grows, and every generation generally the amount of land that they have to work with shrinks, and that is exactly what we're trying to slow down through conservation easements.
And you have to have a critical mass in order to be viable. I mean, you have to have a certain amount to have a viable entity, especially in regard to ranching. And if that diminishes below a certain level, it's no longer something that you can do and continue to thrive at. And it's important. Land is a critical component of what we do, and in agriculture, period, but especially on the cattle side of things.
We don't change a lot on the land. I mean, we're just out there. I mean, when you go to a ranch, I would love to be able to bring every Floridian out on a ranch. And I think our job as an association would be done if we could do it, because we could get them out there. They would see the wildlife, and they would understand that what benefits the wildlife is also benefiting the ranching. And they kind of work hand in hand. If you do one thing bad, the other one doesn't work well. So it's they work together, and I think if we could get everybody out on a farm or ranch, Gene Lawless, a past president, was open gates, open minds. That was his tagline when he was president, and he was right. I mean, every time we get somebody out on a farm or ranch, their attitude changes. They ask questions, and they learn a lot about agriculture, and most of our farmers and ranchers that are members of our association are members of yours.
That's right.
And a lot of people in the cattle industry are also in produce or sugarcane or timber industry. We kind of have to be pretty diverse to make it work.
That's right. Pat, definitely there's a serenity, a tranquility, especially being on the farm, on the ranch. And one of the things I enjoy, especially after a real hectic week, if I get a chance, especially in the evening, is to go out and park and as the sun sets, and over at, you'll have some cypress clad with some Spanish moss hanging in it, and that sun setting, and the cattle are grazing, and then they're chomping along, and it's a beautiful place. But it's also attractive to others. The other people see that, and they're like, we'd like to have a piece of that. So they want to plant a house pretty close or in the middle of that too, and urban sprawl has become an issue. Is that something that you see in Gadsden County? I know you mentioned it earlier that everywhere is growing, but is it something that you feel threatened, especially personally, on y'all's place?
I mean, I think we all do, from one end of the state to the other. I mean, certainly the further I go south, I see how much quicker that it's expanding. It's a little slower in the Panhandle, but it's still happening. It's not always happening with a gigantic development or something like that, but every time a farm or ranch doesn't get passed down to the next generation that wants to carry on, then it gets divided up to those folks that you were just talking about into smaller tracts. And once that happens, it never goes back the way it was. So I've certainly seen that in my life, up and down the road by our place, and that's kind of my biggest hope, is that we can kind of get a handle on that, and and get everybody understanding that we can't continue on this at this pace, that we have to pump the brakes a little bit. Again, the Florida Cattlemen's Association is a private property right, so I'm not going to tell you.
That's right.
But what I do want to do is I want to work in Tallahassee and elsewhere to find a way for you to stay economically viable and stay on the farm or ranch. So I'm not going to tell you to not sell out to the golf course or whatever, but hopefully I can find a way, or our association can find a way through the years, and we're getting better. We're getting closer to being able to compete on an even playing field with some of these programs. And I think that's why they're so important to Florida. And when I say Florida, I mean, if you're moving here tomorrow and you're moving here because of what you see today, then you need to be on our side on these issues, because it's going to continue to change. And the one thing that's always kind of irked me a little bit was that somehow farmers and ranchers got painted by, I'm going to say, some unknowing, good-intended, potentially environmentalist as that we were bad for the environment. And I think we're the best thing going for wildlife habitat and the environment, that it certainly in the state of Florida. I mean, if it wasn't for us, if you think traffic's bad now, you just wait.
Well, that's it. And I think you hit on something again, especially going back to the topic of sustainability, is we need to be profitable. We can't own land and pay the taxes and make a living without making a profit. And so we have to be economically viable in order to stay. In order to be economically viable, it's good for the economy in this state, but it's also good for the environment in this state. And it's not bad for us to be profitable. It's not bad for us to make money so that we can keep and maintain what a lot of people do enjoy, and that's open green space and water recharge and other things that they get the benefit from as well. And I just think a lot of times that some of what used to be our greatest adversaries have become some of our strongest advocates, because they are educated and they are concerned about the direction that this state is heading. They want to see the wildlife corridor maintained. They want to see us remain sustainable, because they know the alternative is irreversible. And I think that's why Florida Cattlemen's, in your approach, cows do keep this state green. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But we have to have a little green in the pocket to be able to keep going there. And that's a really, really important thing. Earth Day is April 22nd this year. What's the message that you would like Floridians to hear related to Earth Day?
So Earth Day, I'll just tell you, my dad had a poster in his office when he was an extension agent. And I mean, so you got to envision, I was just a young boy, and the poster was the Earth, a globe, but it was farms and ranches on. I don't know where this poster came from, but it was just all farms and ranches, and it showed wildlife and all the positive things. And this poster is like 40 years old.
That's cool.
Probably. And so, I mean, Earth Day is every day if you're on a farm or a ranch. I mean, every day we're trying to do what's right for the soil, for the wildlife, for our animals, for the crops we're growing. I think Earth Day it's great to recognize it on a single day, but just remember, farmers and ranchers, they kind of recognize it every single day. We talked earlier about, you just mentioned about some of our biggest enemies becoming some of our biggest defenders in a lot of ways.
Right.
And I think social media has made it where we can kind of get out there and they can see a little bit about what's going on, and we can engage with people that are outside of our normal bubble of seeing in a day. And I just really believe that we have to continue. We used to be bad as ag at telling our story.
That's right.
We really were.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure my grandfather never told anybody anything because he only hung out with other farmers and ranchers and stuff. But as we continue to grow technology with our social media and all the other resources that we have, I think we've done a lot better job of connecting with the general public and sharing that message. And, they're telling our story for us. They're carrying our message because they believe it, because they've been out on a farm or ranch and they understand it. And I think, I think the future, I know we continue to harp on 1,000 people, 1,200 people a day moving to Florida, but I really do believe the future for ag in Florida is bright. And I know that there's a lot of hurdles, but there always has been in agriculture, and there will continue to be. But I do at least think that there's more than just farmers and ranchers out there fighting for us. I mean, we do have some people that understand the value that we bring outside of the food and fiber we produce, which, by the way, I mean, you got to eat.
That's right.
So,
well, and I think too, it's nice to have a day that's committed to it, to just recognition. And a lot of our associations and organizations can rally around that and tell a story of agriculture. And, we've got to use the land. We don't abuse it. And I think there's been some misconceptions and folks that have probably promoted some things that were a little dramatic or hyperbole in order to make a point. But we want to use what we have. We're a good steward of what we have. If not, that abuse of it would lead to a lack of ability to use that for future generations. And obviously we're the benefactor of it. So what a blessing it is. Pat, is there anything else that you want to, just any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I would just like to say, if you are an ag producer, to get engaged and show up to your commodity association groups, to Farm Bureau, which whatever part of ag you're in, it's important to show up. The world is run by the men and women that show up, and if you're not in ag, I would urge you to, if you meet a farmer or rancher, ask them questions, talk to them, you'll probably get an invite out to the farm or the ranch, and you'll have a better understanding of what we do. And then I think you'll really appreciate the land stewardship that we do on a daily basis, and that we are the best stewards of the land. And I think it's important with, I don't know what the number they throw around, 2% of people are in agriculture. So, so if you're in the 98% that aren't, reach out. You can meet somebody somewhere that'll be more than willing to open their gates and show you around. And I think you'll have a new appreciation for agriculture.
Well, Pat, I want to thank you for what you're doing. It takes time off of your ranch and from what you would normally be engaged in to lead this organization. And Florida Cattlemen's is really, really, really blessed to have you and your team as well to represent an industry that is vital to Florida agriculture and to our future. And just appreciate what you've done, your vision, your commitment and devotion to it. Your passion for this industry as well is definitely obvious. And just thank you for all that you're doing. And I just think it's really nice that and a blessing that we can have a relationship too between Florida Cattlemen's Association and Florida Farm Bureau as well. We do. We've got members on that are members of both groups and other organizations as well, because we are diverse. And most of our industry is trying to survive, and we have a certain component of raising of beef, and is also in vegetables or timber or other things that each of us are engaged in. And boy, just thank you again for all that you're doing. When will you be up for, when will your term come to an end?
It'll be in June.
In June.
So I think my dad and Phoebe are looking forward to that. But I do want to say this, because I get a lot of credit for what the association is doing or has done, that while you're sitting in the chair as the president. But we are a volunteer leadership organization. I couldn't do any of this without my fellow members and the volunteer leaders that work with me, and our staff. I mean, we have a small staff, but they are sharp and they really have a passion, just like we all do. But they get to do it every day. But they have to do it in an office or in Tallahassee every day. And at least we get to go back to the farm or ranch and relax every once in a while. But I mean, I think we've got two great organizations, and there are other ag organizations in our state that are awesome. And I just think that again, I would urge anybody in agriculture to get involved in their commodity association and farm bureau. I think it'll, it's the cheapest insurance you can buy, to be in an organization like yours or ours, and at least you'll always have somebody out there fighting for you and looking out for you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Pat. He has made a choice. It's that he's in agriculture, and I can tell you, 7th generations in Gadsden County, Florida. Coon Holla. There he is. Coon Bottom. That's it, Coon Bottom. And thank you for joining us today, Pat. Appreciate your insight, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here and everything that you do.
Thank you for supporting the Rural Recharge podcast. We hope that you're enjoying these conversations brought to you by farmers for our neighbors. While you're here, please consider giving us a rating or review. It really helps us to continue to share the story of our Florida farm families and their important impact on our local communities. Thank you.